Extinction level events, events that could end our civilization. These events are far more prevalent than you may think. We're going to talk about these. We're also going to talk about the prospects that there may have been other civilizations prior to recorded history, perhaps more advanced than even our own civilization. We're going to talk about ice ages. We're going to talk about major events like comet and asteroid impacts, super volcanoes. There's something worse than super volcanoes. It's these large igneous eruptions that cause things like the Siberian traps, the Deccan traps, all that basalt you see along the Columbia River. My friends, there are many things that Mother Nature throws at us. Solar flares, coronal mass ejections, Carrington events, and even bigger Miyake events. There have been excursions of our magnetic field, the Lachamps excursion. There are many things that could bring our civilization down that Mother Nature throws out, aside from these things that we can do to ourselves, which are all too prevalent. Our civilization is far more fragile than most of you would think. I did cover that in a previous video. I'll point to it later in this cast. And so we got a lot of ground to cover here. But the topics should be riveting because we're going to talk about the things that could take us down that Mother Nature could throw at us that you really need to be prepared for. Our civilization needs to be doing things. And so far, we're like totally unaware as a civilization of some of these threats we face, how imminent they may be, and the things we need to do for them, steps we need to take. And some of them are literally out of this world. Not all of them. There's things you can do. But anyway, a lot to cover here. So, my friends, we're going to start with this. We're going to talk about some of these extinction level events. And I'm going to do a share screen here. So, check these out. And what's interesting here, this is in Wikipedia, and this is extinction level events. Now, they talk about the big five events. A lot of you have heard of the late Ordovician mass extinction, which is thought to have been precipitated by a gamma ray burst. And we're going to talk about gamma ray burst and one that may be aimed right at us that could occur. We're going to be talking about this well, we're not going to talk about all these in detail. We're going to talk about this stuff in general. But there, as you can see, there are quite a few big mass extinctions. This Permian Trax extinction was thought to have been caused by a igneous eruption, like I mentioned, is worse than super volcanoes. I mean, these extinctions take out a lot of the living creatures. This Permian extinction took out 53% of marine families, 84% of marine genera. Back then, most of the life was in the ocean, and 81% of all marine species. Now, so you can understand what this is. Species are like animals that they breed together. They're not going to produce a fertile offspring. And that might be like a bobcat and a house cat. Or better yet, the big cats. Between some of the big cats can breed, but they don't produce a fertile offspring, like tigers and lions, for example. Now, that means you're a different species. To be in a different genera, you need to have more divergence, like maybe a between a house cat and a lion. To be a different family, families are broad. A family would include all like mammal meat eaters walking, running around 2 4. Families would include dogs, wolves, cats, otters, things like that. A wide, much wider range of animals. So you're talking about over half of the families dying from an event. You're talking 81% of species. I'm hanging at 84% of genera and less of species. But anyway, 70% of terrestrial on land vertebrate species. So this was a great die-in. This was a one here right at the beginning of the Jurassic. This is between the two different dinosaur ages. Dinosaurs already kind of started, but didn't have a real big headway. And this one took out 23% of the families, 48% of the genera, 20% of marine families, and 55% of marine genera. 70 to 75% of all species extinct. And the one you may be most familiar with is the impact event that's believed to have been caused by an impact in the Yucatan Peninsula. Yeah, there was also a Deccan tar trap, a Deccan igneous eruption area in India at the same time. If you put a pencil through the earth where the impact occurred, the Deccan Traps is exactly on the opposite side. And here's what they find. A lot of those eruptions, those large igneous eruptions, occur directly opposite from major impact events. What happens? You have impact here, it creates a shock wave that goes to the crust of the earth. And where that shock wave meets on the other side, it destroys the crust of the earth. And then all the magma and stuff from below just it comes out. Also, those large igneous explosions can be caused by plate ruptures, like maybe where the rift zone is forming in Africa, where they say a new ocean's going to form, or perhaps a subduction of the sand, the Juan de Fuca plate off our west coast might cause something like that. A lot of things, guys. There's a lot of stuff involved here. So these are big extinction events. When it got to dinosaurs, but left us the birds. 50%, half of all genera. That's huge. 75% of the species became extinct. That's a huge extinction. But what you got to bear in mind is this does not include the younger Dryas type extinction. It's not considered one of the five major extinctions. And that's always something that's amazing because it took out the mastodons, it took out the mammoths, it took out saber-toothed cats, it took out Dyer's wolves, short-nosed bears, woolly rhinoceroses, probably the Clovis Point people in North America. It took out a lot, and yet it don't get listed here. But you can see there is a continuous, over the last 540 million years, 42 million years, a continuous statistical set of events occurring. So it's not just, and they said five big dives. I count more than five bigger spikes. One, two, I say three, four, five. Okay, if you don't count these, you can count. Maybe if you don't count that one. I don't know, is that one or that one count? But anyway, it's hard to know how they count all these things over the millions of years as they think all these things occurred. And my friends, so let's look at something else. Let's go back and look more recently to prior to the younger Dryas, which they don't even list. This is what the Earth looked like. The Earth has been in ice ages, known as the Quaternary Ice Age period, for over 2.6 million years. Now, this period, the ice ages typically last about 100,000 years, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes shorter. And the interglacial warm periods in between will last 10 to 20,000 years, usually more like 10 to 15. We are already we're over 12,000 years into our interglacial period since the last major ice age, which lasted 100,000 years. Now let's think about the Earth at this time. This is where we're going to talk about the prospects for a civilization that may have been more advanced than us that just might not have survived this event. Kind of like the Clovis Point people that were living here inland. Now, if you look at this map, look at all this ice. This is ice sheets that are 2 miles thick. I mean, it's like being up to the edge of Antarctica. Now, if you were in the continental United States, I mean, even down here in Alabama, you were just in that ice went to the Ohio River. So it was right up next to Kentucky. So if you were in Alabama, you were only 2 states away from a 2-mile thick ice sheet. Think about that. So what would that made all this land? Like tundra, like, North Slope of Alaska almost. This would have been cold, frigid. Same thing in Europe. This is where the Neanderthal people and Cro-Magnon people were living back toward the end of this era. And they were in an exceedingly cold climate. Most of the land would have been cold. Maybe around the equator, not so bad. But most of the land on Earth would have been unbearably cold. Not to mention that it did have those mammoths and mastodons, and did have the saber-toothed tigers, short-nosed bears, dire wolves all running around. It would not have been a place to set up a farm. It would not have been a place to build, everyday structures. Mammoth just come barging through a house, probably. Short-nosed bears would have tore it apart. You would not have wanted to live in these areas if you could have avoided it. So what's interesting though, the sea levels were about 410 to, this whole area would have been, everything was about 10.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees Celsius cooler temperatures than today. on average, sometimes worse. So it was frigid and probably a lot of wind blowing. So you would want to live as close to the coast as possible for several reasons. One, water moderates temperature. Two, the atmosphere was thicker closer to the oceans, which would give you more warmth. The atmosphere, think about it, the ocean level was, like I said, 410 to 440 feet lower than the ocean levels. So you would have had that much air to provide just a little bit more warming, and every little bit in a cold climate like that would have counted. So proximity to the ocean and a higher, thicker blanket of air over you would have made it very attractive. One other thing would have made it super more attractive is that when water is colder, and the water back then was colder, it contains more saturated oxygen, which means it can support more animal life. So that is why if you go up near the Arctic and Antarctic regions, there's way more fish there than elsewhere. So you would have had the benefit of more food, more seafood, which is probably a lot easier to catch back in those days. So you'd have had more food, more seafood, and you would have had warmer temperatures. So huge advantages to living in the coastal regions in those days. Not to mention today, where's most people live? Over 80% of the people live in the coastal regions, mainly because the oceans make for easy access, transport, and things like that. So the coastal regions are favored heavily today. Almost all the big cities, most of them are on the coastal regions or next to some big river or a big lake. So these make a huge difference in where people settle. And given the harsh climates in the continents in those days and the large animals running around, that would have made it far more so than it is today. So think about this. How long did it take our civilization to spring up after the last ice age? Well, less than 12,000 years. The historical period, about 6,000 years or less. And even that being punctuated by major catastrophes. We're going to talk about a flood, not just the Younger Dryas. A lot of people think Noah's flood goes back to the end of the Younger Dryas. I don't think so. There is good chance for a flood called, and we're going to talk about this, the Burkle crater that occurred back in about 5,000 years ago. Could have set up the exact conditions for Noah's flood on the timeline that Noah's flood was supposed to take place. Anyway, so let's go back to this. You may be aware that Plato talked about Atlantis. He said it existed over 12,000 years ago by our current calendar from the time, that he was talking about. It's like 12,500 years ago or older, which matches the time that the Younger Dryas occurred. And what happened when the Younger Dryas occurred, the ice sheets melted fast, but everything got cold too, all of a sudden, even colder. It was a climatic disaster. Well, it's thought that a comet hit here on the Laurentide ice sheet. Maybe a chunk of it hit over here in the Adriatic Sea and caused a tsunami. There's a lot of signs there's been a tsunami swept over the Sahara Desert, going from east to west. And there's the Rykot structure out here in Mali that looks a whole lot like Atlantis might have looked at that time, according to the descriptions of it. But there's also indications there might have been some civilizations out here off the coast of Spain and other places. Cuba, there's a subsided area attached to island of Cuba. The radar seems to make it look like pyramids are down there. I don't know, my friends. There is a pyramid off the coast of Japan in the ocean that looks like it's over 10,000 years old. Some people say it's natural structures, but it really looks to a lot of people like a pyramid. So there's real oddball things if you look back in time. But here's the thing. This would have been the favorite area to live right along the coastal areas for many reasons. Now, given what I said, it didn't take that long for civilization to rise. Now, you talk about the last ice age lasted 100,000 years. If it was forcing people to live in the coastal regions, they may have picked up fishing. They may have become more aquatic, than the normal animals that were on land. There is some theories that cause humans a water ape because we can, unlike most mammals, we can hold our breath. Our fat is mostly not internal in our organs, but underneath our skin. We have a loss of hair for a lot of our bodies, and we have webbing that is only usually occurs with marine animals. So it might have been that our species diverged And there's all kind of theories of mermaids and stuff, especially like in cave art in Sahara and other places. So I don't know if this is anything to it, my friends, but it could be our species diverging. Maybe some did go into the water for some time, even more so. But if you look at the stories of the old gods, the Anunnaki, they were always depicted as having a fish on them or being fishmen. It was said they would go into the water. It could be that there's legends that they modified a more primitive land-based human to make them look more like them. Maybe that's one we got. Maybe we weren't descended from them, but maybe we're descended from the modifications. But if you go back to those old stories about the gods, I'm not talking about the creator, the greater creator. I'm talking about the pantheon of gods that a lot of these older civilizations deified. They may have been humans. They may have been advanced humans whose civilization was destroyed trying to get traction on land where they didn't live before because that was all that was left. Uh, we'll talk about that more in a little bit. So, if you had a civilization down here and these ice sheets melted, you might have had islands out here and other places you inhabited all around this area. The Caribbean might have been a great place. All that would be underwater today. All those coastal cities would be underwater and mostly covered in mud and sediment. There's also a lot of dust that blew during the Younger Dryas, a very heavy load of dust. You wouldn't find any signs of those cities anymore. And especially after, if you take even our cities, after 12,000 years, all the pipes will rust, the plastic will degrade, the steel will rust, everything will come falling down. Well, we find pyramids. We find giant stones. Some people think the pyramids and the Sphinx predate the often given dates for the creation. Hey, of course, the Egyptians would argue with that. Hawassan Company would fight that tooth and nail that narrative because their ancestors made everything. Yeah, right. Anyway, so yeah, all this would be lost today. All those areas where they would have lived and maybe even farmed are gone underwater if that had happened. Now think about it. They might have had 100,000 years to develop a civilization. Maybe they actually developed technology beyond ours, which made more primitive people think they were gods and gave them the ability to fly because they came from above, according to many of these legends, and maybe even to have genetic technologies to modify the more primitive humans that were still living inland. This is all speculation. I'm not saying this is the case. It's speculation, but you can't rule it out because there's a lot of anomalies. We'll go more into them in the later part of this video, but we're going to go more on the distinction parts. But I'm just painting this picture up front. There's also the notion of the Silmarillion hypothesis that posits the idea that maybe even advanced civilizations evolved at the end of the dinosaur era. Maybe some of those raptors got opposable thumbs and big brains and might have accomplished something and then got wiped out. I don't know, my friends. Just something to contemplate, just something to think about. But we're going to go past this now. We're going to go more back to this ice age in general. The quaternary glaciation, like I said, lasted about 2.6 million years, excuse me. Now, I know a lot of you think the world was created in 6,000 years. I do believe in God and Jesus Christ, but that's another discussion. We'll save it for another day. But anyway, this is all some interesting topics, guys, because this ice age had cycles. And here's another cycle for civilizations. You're not going to survive these big glaciations with a civilization like we know it today. These are the warm periods. And this is our current warm period. And I think this current warm period, if you look at this, is longer than these other ones, except maybe that one. That one looked like it was warmer way back here. But this one, not so much. Oh, this one, yeah, this one is doing pretty well, but a lot of ups and downs in here. A lot of ups and downs. These are the low temperatures. This is right at the Younger Dryas. Maybe that was Younger Dryas there. Because we were actually coming out of the ice age when the Younger Dryas hit. We're on the verge of coming out of it. So you can model temperature, carbon dioxide levels, and dust concentrations. There was a lot of dust in the ice age. It was a dry time. The continents were not friendly, not by any stretch of the imagination. So You see cycles there. Oh, yeah, there was something else I wanted to show them on these other. Here it is. For those that don't know, Earth's had some much warmer periods in the past. If you look at this blue line, short-term average, long-term average, but we've had some lot warmer times in the past. As a matter of fact, everybody talks about the great warming of 50 million years ago. This is it right here. This is not the peak by any stretch of the imagination. If you look back here, if you go back to about the time the dinosaurs disappeared, that comet did something big to us when it hit. Temperatures dropped and they never came back to this level again. And what's happening? They're still going down. So all this talk about warming, we might get a little bit, but is it going to take us back to here or here? Probably not here. I don't know. Some people think we're going to melt. But, in any event, my friends, the trend is down. In fact, the problem is this is a threat because if you reach a level where it gets so cold that you don't get enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the plants will actually not survive. Anything below 180 parts per million, the plants can't survive. And it came close to that at one period back here in the past. So, yeah, we got to watch that. That's a threat. But so if we come in here and we look at these other events here, the Younger Dryas, this is the period at the end of the last ice age. Let's have a look at everything changed abruptly. You see here, we had these warming was starting that could have ended the ice age, and that got a little bit cooler, and then boom, it dropped like a rock. And then for a couple thousand years, it was really cold. Really cold, like back to the ice age or colder. But the ice sheets melted. So you had melting ice sheets, raising oceans, but it was cold. And then what happened? When we come out of that, everything warmed up in a hurry. But this is where we're at today. Oh, look at this recent warming, cooling. Look at that. They talk about that. Look at these warming periods. We are today right here. They don't talk about this stuff back here to these peaks, these big areas. Nope. Accumulation of ice and snow. See, Younger Dryas, the temperature was down, and so was the ice and snow. Why? It got melted by that impact. And we've slowly come back up where we have decent ice and snow today. And some of this period right here was the probably the what they call the little ice age right here. And then some of that's melted back, but not down to this level. So even though we've had some loss of glaciation, it's loss of glaciation probably formed during the little ice age. And there's talks in Europe about how the glaciers were running people out of their villages in Switzerland and other places. So, yeah, the glaciers advanced. Well, now they're retreating. Duh. Just wanted to show you guys this stuff to put things in perspective. This is Younger Dryas here. Anyway, a lot of people don't tell you these things. So that is putting it into perspective. All right. Depiction of different land cover during the Younger Dryas. So polar desert, everything pink. Inland lakes, steep, tundra. Most of Europe was tundra, steep. You see what I'm saying? This was bitter cold areas to live in, like the North Slope of Alaska. And I said Alabama would have been about the same. And what's this yellow? Dry steep. Not much. This looked good. You had some woodlands where? Close to the coast. How about that? Close to the water. Close to the water. And Turkey had some civilization. Interesting. Up here around Switzerland and southern Germany and the mountains. That's kind of odd that they had woodlands, but it did. Desert. I don't know about that because it's actually green later on. But anyway, so I don't know. Things were bitter. Things were cold. It was a tough time to live. That was a Younger Dryas, which, was the glaciers had melted. So if you were a civilization at that time, your civilization got the heck knocked out of it, and suddenly you had to go and reestablish yourself. It was difficult. For 2,000 years, it was bleak, really bleak. And so as soon as that period ended, We find Glopi Tepe and places like that were established. Which looks to many, they've interpreted those as being warnings about those kind of events, astronomical warnings about the kind of events that we might expect to occur. Like somebody had knowledge and wanted to let us know. Now, we're going to talk about the Burkle crater. We're going to talk about Noah's flood, the Younger Dryas crater flood. A lot of people think that's Noah's flood. I would say, likely not, because this crater formed about 4,500 to 6,000 years ago. Bobby, and it's believed to be, well, let's say 4,500 to 5,000 BC, excuse me, somewhere in that range. Maybe less than that, but this occurred at about the right time for Noah's flood. It occurred right here in the Indian Ocean. There's about 4 miles depth of water there. You ever shot a bullet in the water? It don't go far. But this comet or asteroid piece, which is probably about a kilometer in diameter, which I've talked about impacts over on my Galactic Greg's channel and what different type of impacts could do to you. So this is not a world-ending event, but it was a world-changing event because it's thought it caused 600-foot thick tsunamis all around this area. They find the chevrons on the shores that seem to be associated with it. They find this big crater in the bottom of the ocean right here in the Indian Ocean. They believe this evaporated enough water to create enough moisture in the atmosphere. I mean, a huge chunk of the ocean just evaporated. This thing had enormous power when it hit Earth. Let's see, somewhere here it talks about how many, like 200,000, some crazy number of megatons of like nuclear equivalent. I don't know where that's at, but anyway, it was a crazy event. It evaporated so much water that some scientists dispute this, but the ones that are following this believe that it would have rained for 2 months. Now, I've seen a recent scientist talking about 40 days and nights and of rain, and Jesus been in the desert for 40 days. And he said that the reason that 40 was used, that was the biggest number that most people back in ancient Israel could actually relate to. 40 days. He said that was, 40 was the biggest number any of them could think about back in the day. And the Israelis, the Hebrew back in the day, were not known for mathematical powers. Let's put it that way. So it might be that it was longer, or it might have been 40 days and nights. But, a big number to them. That was a big number to them. So here's where the Burkle crater is, right in here. And the sides are a lot higher than the center all around it, which does indicate an impact. The impact that went 4 miles deep in the ocean had to be quite an impact. And like I said, it would have not only just created a tsunami from the impact, this thing is believed to have evaporated crazy amounts of water. It would have caused global, worldwide rains. Now, you think about when it rains real heavy for 8 hours, anywhere in the east, even up in the Appalachian Mountains. Remember the flood we recently had there from a hurricane? Now you just imagine it raining hard for 2 solid months. Even in the mountains, you would be in dire straits, dire trouble. So this was perhaps a huge impact to life on Earth. This was a catastrophic event that matches Noah's flood. So what happened prior to Noah's flood? In the Bible, it talks about the sons of God coming down and knowing the daughters of men. If you look throughout and having offspring, which were called the Nephilim, which were said to be giants, there is all kind of story of demigods created from the gods breeding with women, maybe some vice versa. But in any event, what did I say earlier? If you can produce a fertile offspring, and these were said to be fertile offspring, you're the same species. you got to remember, even as far divergent as Cro-Magnon man was from Devotians and Neanderthals, or Neanderthals, however you want to say it, they produce fertile offspring. And we are that. So they were the same species, even though they looked way different. They were actually the same species. And all the races today, what we call races, same species. But humanity had much more divergence back when the Devotians and the Neanderthals roamed the earth. Much more divergence. Maybe they were big hairy goomers, and maybe these guys who were aquatic humans just didn't want to look at that. So maybe they created a species that is a little dumber, a little weaker, and looked a little bit more like them. Made us in their image from the dust or species of the earth, as it were. So, yeah, this is another article about tsunamis and things like that from back in the era. Civilizations buried underwater. And North Atlantic tsunami of 610 BC. There's a lot of these ancient tsunamis, Burkle Crater here. So, guys, it goes on and on and on and on and on. And that fits Noah's flood, fits it perfectly, way better than does the Younger Dryas that a lot of people try to attribute to. Oh, what's going on there? This is Globly Techie, Globly Techie, Teppy. I can't say that. This is runs they found, which extended civilization back a lot farther than they thought. Now look at these formations here, these upright T's. This isn't the only place they're found. And this is probably not even the oldest one now that they're really looking into it. And what they found inscribed on these, according to many, are a warning of the kinds of events that happen, astronomical events that happen during and caused the Younger Dryas. So maybe there's a cyclic aspect to that. Here's another, Tess Tepler. And what do you find there? T-shaped stela. Don't that look familiar? Oh, that says that's Globally Techie. But anyway, it's very, very similar to Globally Teppy. Okay, this article is also about Globally Teppy. But anyway, they do find this. Here is Navali Kori. This is also in Turkey. Oh, I showed you there was forest in Turkey. Turkey was probably a good place to live back in those days. So this one is believed to be 84 to 8100 BC. Basically, after the Younger Dryas calmed down, you could get a foothold again. And it may be that this is where civilization reestablished and they spread out from there to Sumer, in what is today Iraq, and created a civilization there, which many thought for a long time was the oldest civilization. This predates that. Maybe they had some agriculture going there. And so, this could have been what come out of that. Now, here is Sumer, the area that became Sumer, Sumerian city, Tel Farah. And some of these are believed to be quite old here. Here they're talking 2900 BC, 3000 to 2900 BC. I'm seeing some stuff that suggests even older stuff in the area of Sumer. They had an alphabet. They wrote in cuneiform. They had a strange 60-base numerical system from which we get our 360 degrees is a circle, or 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. That all came from there. I wonder how we come up with this crazy stuff. Well, it had its advantages for some reason. But there's a lot of other things other than ice ages and comet and asteroid impacts. So we just talked about two comet and asteroid impacts in the last 13,000 years. The crater of the Younger Dryas and the Burkle Crater, which both could have greatly altered and destroyed civilizations. And Noah's flood might have been an attempt to wipe out some of those Nephilim. But apparently it wasn't 100% successful, according to legends. And as you may know, the Native Americans here in my region talked about red-haired giants that were cannibals. and they wiped them out in the cave just a few hundred years before white man got here. And there's also talks about such red-headed giants all over the world, to include the Kandahar giant. Strange stuff. I don't know if there's anything to that or any of that, but it's interesting. So, Earth's magnetic field broke down 42,000 years ago, caused a sudden massive climate change. And this is thought to be perhaps the event that brought down the Neanderthal people. Perhaps. Because it roughly, this little chimp's excursion roughly matches when they seemingly disappeared. All the others think they just bred into us. And because we're so far fewer of them, it's more dilute in our blood and our genetics. But we may be the regular descendants of both Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon. In any event, so what happened here is that they believe that the people that lived on land at the time were living in caves to get away from this event, because the ultraviolet radiation on land would have been horrendous, and it would also cause a lot of crop failure. It was a difficult time to survive, and this could happen again. This is another one of those events that could happen that could take down our civilization. The Carrington event is well known as a solar coronal mass ejection that came out of this large set of sunspots on 1 September 1859, as discovered by Richard Carrington. Now, my friends, this caused fires in telegraph stations, and if it happened today, it would absolutely destroy our power grid, even if we had the magnetic field they had back then. But our magnetic field today is 9% weaker than it was in 1859. Fully 9% weaker. We're more vulnerable to a smaller storm. And in fact, the railroad event that occurred in 1921, which also caused some mayhem, if it were to happen today, it's thought to be an event that would take down our modern power grid, because it didn't have a long-range transformers back then that we have today. So, and there's this thing called a Miyake event. A Miyake event is stronger than the Carrington event, and they think it comes from solar flares. The most recent one being somewhere around 700 and the year 774 AD. Now they call it CE. I guess they don't want to have the Jesus connection. And then we apparently had one in 993. This one's pretty well known. This is also known as the Charlemagne event. Well, apparently there was one a couple of hundred years later. But now it's been, over 1,000 years since we've had one of these. But that doesn't mean we're not going to get one. See, there's several of them that occurred in the BC area that they can find these. And from looking at carbon isotopes and ice samples and tree rings. This is how they started discovering these. They're huge events, much worse than the Carrington event. So if we were to look at the Carrington event, now here's the list of solar storms that 1582, 1730, 1859. Yeah, you see, we can find some traces of these storms. And we can find Chapman-Silverton storm in 1872. Look here, November geomagnetic storm in 1882, 1903, 1909, and then 1991. Among the most extreme geomagnetic storms, farthest equator-ward lower altitude aurora ever documented. Burned up fuses, electrical apparatuses, telephone stations, caused fires at signal towers and telegraph stations. Telecommunication blackouts lasted several hours. Just back in 1921. That was 104 years ago. So between 1921 and 1859, you only got about 62 years separation. Yeah, so you don't know when one's going to hit us. You just don't know. These are other major storms, to include the one that took down the power grid in Quebec in March of 1989, Now, I've heard people on YouTube who's going to tell you all about a coronal mass ejection. They'll tell you all about the threats to our power grid, and they will tell you that these things only happen in the daytime. You ain't got to worry about if it's night. Excuse me? This occurred at night. Because the magnetic field of Earth surrounds the planet. So if you get a really big magnetic storm, it can ring the whole field and take down everything planet wide. The Keratin event, the railroad event, cause all kind of crazy. You didn't have to worry if you wouldn't have auroras at night, guys. I mean, these storms can occur at night. The big ones can cause effects at night. This event occurred at night. In fact, it was in just after midnight. It was literally at night. So that's why you come to me. I will correct them. The Halloween solar storms. This one wasn't aimed right at Earth, fortunately, because it was an X-45 flare. Good thing it didn't hit Earth directly, but we saw it. And then in 2012, it's not listed because it didn't. Yeah, that one we caught the edge of the Halloween storm. That's why it's listed on that list. Here's a list of storms, events not affecting Earth. And it's July 2012. Ultra fast CME directed away from Earth have made it's a characteristics that may have made it a Keratin event class storm. There are some that say this was worse than the Keratin event. We were very fortunate that it went away from the Earth. So all I got to say about that. These are some other events, and we just had one back in 21 October 2025. Big one that was directed away from Earth. We just saw that recently. So we have been lucky in some regards. How long will our luck hold out? How long will our luck hold out? Maybe not too long. Look what's coming around the sun right now. Now, that's not as big as a Keratin event, a cluster of sunspots. This is maybe 3 to 5 Earth diameters, according to some estimates I read, whereas the Keratin event was believed to have been 5 to 8. But with our 9% weaker power grid and the fact that we have a magnetic field, and the fact that we have these long range transformers, this one can also grow. This one could be a threat to us right now. I don't know. We'll just have to see. But now here's an X-class solar flare that just occurred up here on this part of the sun, on this area right here, on the upper quadrant. We don't even see these sunspots yet. We just got an X-class flare out of them. About an X2, I believe they said. What was it? Yep, X2 class solar flare. So there we are. Unfortunately, right now, the aurora's not big, and that's not aimed at Earth. But that's coming around at us, too. So we may have like a wham wham, and we got a coronal hole right now, which can solar wind make our magnetic field weaker before this stuff rolls around and gets us. There's your X-class flare. These are the big sunspots coming around. This is not a pretty setup, my friends. Not a pretty setup. I'm not saying our grid's going to go down this week, next week, but it could. Chances are probably not, but it could. You can't ignore this stuff. So this is the size comparison here. Those sunspots. Super volcanoes. Now, a lot of people have been concerned about super volcanoes and what those can do to us. And here is a map of super volcanoes that can produce WEIII and WEIII eruptions. Well, I'm glad to see that Long Valley, which is just west of me, is a WEIII. We've had a lot of WEIIIs occurring. This is all up in the Yellowstone area. South America's got quite a few of them up here in the Andes. Of course, Indonesia, we know that we've had Tambora and Toba in this area, which Tambora gave us a year without a summer in 1816 after its 1815 eruption. And Toba, 74,000 years ago, is thought to have almost eradicated humanity. I mean, just almost totally wiped us out. So these are nothing to sneeze at. There's Lake Toba. which is, they say it's the magma chamber is filling again down there. So these don't look like volcanoes because they got such a big caldera that when it erupts, after it erupts, it creates a big evacuated area and it all just falls in and collapses. So what you get is a caldera, not a mountain. And then you got these. So here's just kind of a list of well-known, don't mean that's all they are, well-known VEI eruptions. There's also possibility some of these are in the ocean. And we think we see a new supervolcano forming in the Guatemala. So much Asia. This is youngest Toba explosion, 74,000 years ago, produced 439 to 631 million tons of sulfuric acid. There was a volcanic winter, big one, after that. Fish Canyon. Uh, yeah. Lava Creek eruption. This is Yellowstone right here. Yellowstone. I think Yellowstone's also the Huckleberry. That's Yellowstone. These are the eruptions, not the places. So there's been a lot of eruptions of super volcanoes, and they could wipe out our civilization, almost wipe out humanity. There's another timeline of some of these. See, and we had the explosion of Tambora in 1815, caused a year without a summer in 1816. And that's not the worst our civilization has seen by a long shot. No, sir, not by a long shot. Because in the show in here, yes, 536, we had volcanic winter of 536, which was worse than 1816 because it lasted about a decade that you couldn't grow hardly anything. People were starving all around the earth. Fortunately, we didn't have as big a population. Our agriculture wasn't nearly so technological, and just-in-time systems weren't in existence. People grew their own, were able to harvest it. But this year without a summer was horrendous. It wasn't just a year. Oh, that's 1816. This event in 535, 536, and on for about a decade was so bad, according to Grok. Now, this is Grok talking about this stuff right here. And Grok talked about the Tambora, the year without a summer from 1816 event, that this would not cause total societal collapse, but would cause mass starvation, and a lot of your poorer countries would just starve or probably come to an end. Some of your smaller nations, but civilization, Grok thinks, would survive. However, if we had an event like in 539, Grok says we're done. It says bottom line, a 19 a AD 535 to 550 CE style volcanic winter cluster. Apparently, there's more than one volcano went off then. Would end technological civilization as we know it. The survivors, a century later, would inherit a planet with a climate recovering to normal, but with almost all cities abandoned, most knowledge lost, and the human population reduced to medieval or worse levels. So you're talking most people would cease to exist. This is like probably worse than nuclear war, almost as bad as a grid down situation. Yeah, where you're talking horrendous. They claim the worst year of civilization, the worst year in humanity was 535 AD. My friends, it could occur again. We got a lot of volcanoes waking up right now. A lot of volcanoes. And then there's this large igneous province. Province, excuse me. Providence is a different thing, but maybe Providence will lead to it, right? These are huge areas. We even had one here in the southeast. Chimp. Sierra Madre, High Arctic. I sit here in the Southeast. I don't live in the Southeast anymore. What am I talking about? Siberian traps. This is thought to have caused the biggest extinction we know of. Deccan traps, which is right opposite from the Yucatan Peninsula. Guys, right here off the coast of South America, holy smoke, out in the ocean. You can see there's the land area there under the water is a little higher in that area. It's kind of interesting if you go Google Earth and look at it. So these are major events here that could prove. I mean, yeah, look at it. That's the crust. Just a plain yellow is just crust. Sheol is the deep orange. So, guys, there's your zones. Lots of them. These events are worse than super volcanoes, and we may get one now. The Rift Valley here in there's one that's close to it already. Look at that. Afro-Arabian lip. Maybe that could re-erupt. As Africa splits apart. So, gamma ray burst. Here's another big area. This is where stars can, like two stars can collide, and they create a beam that shoots out above and below it, like in North-South Pole regions. WWIII star is known for being able to do this. These beams have X-ray, ultraviolet, optical, infrared, microwave, and radio frequencies, and gamma rays. You can say they shoot out kind of like a laser. They could wipe out life for because it would destroy your ozone layer. They can wipe out life from maybe up to 10,000 light years away. These are, now, we haven't seen any since we've been observing in the Milky Way, but we see them all over galaxies going on in other places. But we may have 1/8,000 years, light years from here that could be aimed at us that could cause an issue. We may be looking down the barrel of a gamma ray burst. So what do you want to do? Move out of the way. Don't be living where you're downrange of the barrel of one of these things, which means you got to move into space and move away from your planet. If it's looking at, well, maybe even out of your solar system. Maybe out of the Oort cloud might be far enough away. I've talked about that, someone here. But these are very energetic, so much so that they're the second brightest event in our universe, or actually the brightest event inside the universe. They're believed to be second only to the Big Bang itself, if such a thing ever occurred. So a lot of discussion about that these days. But in a matter of seconds, one of these gamma ray burst releases more energy than our sun would in 10 billion years. So how's that? And then here's the one that could get us. A real Death Star that could strike Earth. It's this WWIII 10, where's the name of it? It's 10 something. 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. Oh, WWIII 104. I was thinking 10A. It's 104. 4 and an 8 kind of got crossed in my brain here. I knew I wasn't exactly right. I had to find WWIII 104, which means the 104th one we have found in our galaxy. But this one is aimed almost at us, although some people think it's not quite aimed at us. So cross your fingers and hope this one can't get us. But, you know, when you get a picture like that, it looks like you're looking at it from either the North or the South Pole. And that's what it looks at. So some people thought we were looking down the gun barrel. When you look at the pinhole in that angle, it ain't good if it should go into a gamma ray burst. So, guys, no civilization lasts forever, but even mammal life is thought it won't be able to survive when the continents on Earth recollide. That we will see a situation where it's going to be too unbearable on the surface of Earth for mammals to survive 250 million years from now. And about another 150 million years, nothing will be able to survive. The sun's heating up, it's going to boil our oceans, and within 500 million years, there'll be no life on Earth on the surface. And then eventually, a few billion years later, the sun will expand and gobble the Earth. So we got to move out. Survival plan. What do you do? Right now, you got to plan yourself for the short range things because there's several things that bring our civilization down, to including war, nuclear war, biological events, including natural and man-made. I'm more worried about the latter. You can have nanotechnology go awry, maybe robotics with AI, but I don't think the AI is anywhere near having the capacity to do some things that some people think. I will still maintain if you got a problem with AI and robotics, it's the man behind the screen, the man hiding behind the curtain, or that snot-nosed kid in grandma's basement that hacked everything. I'm going to be the queen bee of the world. Anyway, so there are plenty of things. With all the hatred in our hearts and the weapons we're developing and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, I don't think life will be able to continue in one biosphere unless we find out a way to quit hating. That's one reason too. Right now, we got our eggs in one basket, the third rock from the sun. We need to be thinking about that. But food storage. So here it is. What to do? This is talking about volcanic survival mainly. Food storage. Food storage. This is all about volcanic events and global catastrophic risks, asteroids, and things like that. So, what's the top item here? Food storage. Seriously, multi-layered defense, prevention, response. There's things to do. Yeah, funding, survival planning. But under survival planning, the first thing on the list is food storage. How about being able to grow your own food, store seeds? Malnutrition is the biggest thing you got to worry about. Oh my God, artificial general intelligence safety. Anyway, survival stock, survival retreats. Yeah, something to think about. We're talking about the global seed vault up in Svalbard, how you pronounce that. Yep, government. Well, there won't be much of that if some of these things occur. And then the one I'm most interested in the long term, space colonization. Astrophysicist Steve Hawkins advocating colonizing other planets within the solar system as technology progresses sufficiently in order to improve the chances of human survival from planet-wide events, including global thermonuclear war. Well, Elon Musk is taking him up on that challenge. That's why he's trying to go to Mars. But I would suggest Mars is a terrible place to go to. That's why I prefer you build space habitats that you can put an Earth-like environment on the inside, rotate them for Earth-like gravity instead of one-third gravity like Mars, which we don't know how we'll fare with that. Mars is a cold, dry place. But here, if you build these type habitats, and I'm showing the Bernal sphere, because this is one you can build in a comet, inside an asteroid or a comet. And that's why I show this. It can be pretty inside, trees, lakes, forests, rivers. Yes, on the outside, it might look like this. Now, this is depicted to be agriculture rings. You could put the agriculture inside and put it all inside an asteroid or a comet. So this is a spaceship, basically. The outer shell here doesn't rotate. There's a non-rotational shell that's just radiation shielded, and there's a shell spinning inside. This was the adaptation of Gerard K. O'Neill in the 70s on this concept. Again, this is looking through some windows outside. If you were inside a comet or asteroid, you'd have some other internal power and light source, agricultural rings. This shows a Bernal sphere out here where they're mining an asteroid to make these and solar panels to beam energy to Earth. And there it shows a mass driver moving an asteroid. I've talked about mass drivers on my Galactic Greg's channel. So, and this is a topic I usually put over there. Oops, I didn't want to totally get out of that. So we're almost done, guys. Just hang on with me just a little bit here. So this is the like I said, civilizations on their own do not last forever. No civilization lasts forever. A republic normally lasts about 200 years, 250 being a stretch. And what anniversary are we celebrating next year? Just a few months from now, our 250th anniversary, which is about as far as a republic is ever lasted. A democracy, does not last a single generation. Why? Because people vote themselves everything out of the treasury, the largesse of the treasury, and destroy the treasury. Now, with our big bureaucracies, we have tried to turn our republic into a virtual democracy. Can we survive that? Can we survive that? With $38 trillion in debt, can we survive that? Well, hey, there's a lot of resources in space. Those spheres I just shown, just from the asteroid belt, you could build 500 to 1,000 times the surface area of the Earth. If you go out into the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud, you could literally build 35,700 times the surface area of the Earth. There's plenty of resources in space, starting with the little rocks that are caught here near the sun, Earth. I just covered that on a video. So now the one type civilizations have had a little better track record of surviving are empires. Some empires have lasted for a while. They probably morphed quite a bit along the while. The citizens might have starved and nearly died out, but somehow the empire kept going. It was the only government they knew, probably, back in those days. So this Panyan Empire of India apparently is the longest lasting one, with almost 1,850-year reign from 500 BC to 1350 AD. The Roman Empire, if you include the Byzantine Empire and consider them one continuous empire, really the Byzantine Empire sprung out of the Roman Empire and became the Eastern Empire. The Western Empire, Roman Empire, fell much earlier. But this is believed to have been the second longest empire. And it existed as an empire for about 1,500 years. They had a republic prior to that that lasted about 200 years. But and they're probably counting the republic. No, they're not, because it goes from 27 BC to 1435 AD. So that's definitely in the empire era of it, not the republic era. The Holy Roman Empire is the third longest lasting, from 962 AD to Napoleon taking it down in 1806. Now, the Western Empire fell before that 535 AD winter in the global winter that they had lasted about 5 to 10 years. Said about 10 years, most sources. The Eastern Empire did survive through that, but all Europe suffered mightily during that time, mightily. Now, it might have been a little better along the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, but hey, those were rough times. There's no doubt about it. I didn't mean to hit that arrow. Just killed up. Interesting. It didn't back out. Strange. But anyway, so this is that Panyan dynasty. It wasn't all of India, just a little piece. A little piece. So, but civilization is far more fragile than you think. This story was written in about 1958, 1959. It's called I, Pencil by Leonard Read. Isn't that funny? A guy named Read is writing a story about a pencil. I, Pencil. Well, in this story, he goes through great length to describe that no one person knows how to build a number two pencil, how it takes cast of tens of thousands of people to come up with all the resources to manage the factories and all the little ingredients that go into the pencils. Yeah, $4 million in machinery. Yeah, what would that be today? Yeah, 4 million today would be what? 400 million, maybe? I don't know. No one knows. No mastermind. I have read this, and I'll show you the video where I read it to. I'm not going to read it to you today. I just showed you that I have read this, and I did it in this video right here. Civilization more fragile than imagined. I did here on my Green Greg's channel 6 years ago to try to explain just how fragile our civilization was. Now, if you think it was that fragile back 66, 67 years ago, that was before we had the integrated circuit chip. That was before we had computers, internet. artificial intelligence, satellite communications. Today, not only does everything we have depend on the power grid, but the internet, our banking, our money moving, our purchasing, our requisitions, and a lot of our day-to-day management is on computer chips. Your bank account exists in a computer. It's computer ones and zeros in a main server somewhere. Guys, we need to think about this. We are, and what did it talk about over on Grok? If you had an event like 535, the knowledge would be lost. If you don't have the knowledge, you're not building something. Something else I haven't talked about in this video, I have plan to talk about later elsewhere. You know, we always had a time where you could stick a pencil in the ground in Pennsylvania, maybe, and oil would ooze up. In the Mideast, in Iraq, what's Iraq today? They had tar just bubbling up out of the ground. They had one part, it was La Brea tar pits, same thing, right, in California. Used to, they could find copper nuggets, pure copper, laying on top of the ground. Now you got a mine where it's so many parts per thousand in giant strip mines to get it. To get oil, you're either drilling deep and fracking, which requires a lot of technology and a lot of infrastructure, or you're going out to the ocean with a deep sea rig that's not only got, a couple miles or more of ocean water underneath it, then it drills down a couple miles or more past that into the earth, maybe up to 3 or 4 miles now. It's crazy how far we got to go. The infrastructure is required to get the stuff that used to be laying around on top of the ground. So if our civilization collapses, we're not coming back to that level again, not easily, if ever. We're not going to have the easily readable resources of our ancestors. So when you combine that with a lack of knowledge, here's the bottom line. If we fail, we may never come back. We may always be living at best like maybe the Greeks or Romans, maybe without the metals they had. So maybe more Stone Age, maybe Sumerian. Yeah, we could probably, well, even they had some metals. Incas, well, they had metals too. They had gold at least. Yeah, Mayans, mound builders. That's going to be your top level of civilization. You're going to have another chance to go to space. And so if we have one of these global catastrophes, we're done. So right now is our last best chance to survive as a civilization. We don't need to blow it. Yet we got war and all kind of craziness going on, fighting over the crumbs here on Earth when space abounds with resources. It's crazy. Here's something else you can do. Build your own, universal habitat type home. I'm planning to build one here as an example. This is a home you can live in, make a living out of, grow all your food in, collect all your water off the roof, of everything you need within the footprint of 1/10 of an acre to support a family of 4. And here was the Martian version of it. And there are some older drawings I did of this topic. So have you a homestead if you can. I mean, maybe. And this is really shouldn't be much harder to build than a regular Earthship house, but should be transformative. Now, I've got a lot of topics over here on my Galactic Greg's channel that cover similar things like China's asteroid risk. Why they would want to go to asteroids. Mind Space Now. That's one you really ought to watch. Mind Space Now over there. Or if you go back far enough, you will see videos. Oh, yeah, I've talked about these space habitats here when I'm talking about the Oort cloud, my dark fortress concept. In the other videos, I've talked about these space habitats here. But one that really should get your attention is how China can rule the Earth by getting to the moon first, or these mini moons, even these quasi moons, as I discussed in this video. Guys, we can't afford not to, as a civilization, colonize and develop space. We can't afford not to go. But there's things you can do for yourself. Grow food. I grow food here. I'm on a homestead. I bugged out to my bug out location. Now it's my bug in. I live here on my homestead. I'm off grid. Got my own solar. I've got a wood heater here in case I won't be able to go buy propane anymore. I've got rainwater collection set up, and I'm going to set up a lot more. So if the rains down here dissipate, I've got a plan for being able to get as, even if we get only 6 inches a year, I've got a plan to be able to get plenty of water, more than enough to grow the food I need to survive, more than enough. So I'm working on planning. I hope I can get a well in here. But, I am looking at long range planning for how to survive out here in the desert. It's kind of like a Mars base here. Red sand, winds. To talk to you, I got to use a satellite link. My power is a solar off grid. Yeah, it's a lot like living on Mars. Grow my own food. A lot like living on Mars. This is Greg Allison from Mars Base One in the high desert of northeast Arizona. So, guys, probably the best thing you can do is grow your own food. One, it's healthier. You know what's in it. Two, heirloom seeds, have those, you can replant them. You can go to my links to True Leaf Market. I'll show in the video to find that stuff. Guys, this is what you need to survive for the long term, really and truly. And even if you can't get out, if you're in a city, you're going to be lamb chop. You're going to be the long pork. Get out of the cities if you can. If you can't, God help you, but put some plants and planters, put them in your windowsills, on your stoop if you got one, outside your high-rise apartment. Even most of those have a stoop. So do something. Grow a little bit of food, whatever you can, but you can also grow food in spare bedrooms and closets. I've done videos on this channel about how to grow microgreens. And I did grow those in my house for a long time. And then I grew them in a trailer. So those can be grown indoors. Absolutely. You can grow a lot of food indoors. But the city is no place to be under any circumstance if any of these catastrophes strike. Because there's going to be a lot of hungry people running around, and you're going to look mighty delicious to most of them. So that's not a place to be. So if you can get out of the cities, get out of the cities. Prep, and pray, and hope for a better day. And let's hope these things don't hit. But, support efforts to go out into space. We've got to do it as a civilization. But also, what else we got to do? We got to fight these hatreds. We won't survive our own hands, the kind of hatreds we have in our minds and hearts. We've got to overcome this. We have to survive. But we also need to get off this third rock from the sun. We got all our eggs in one basket. It's time to change that too. All right, my friends. Some of you people may not like this message, but it's a message of there are things we can do. There are absolutely things we can do. And humanity as a civilization can survive, but it will only survive if we get off this third rock from the sun in the long term. Because a lot of this stuff will knock us to our knees if they happen, and we may not be able to get up again to the level we're at today. So right now, we've got the unique opportunity to do something big, and it may not last. It may not last till tomorrow. Could end tonight. We have a global war. Well, let's hope not. And we got to get beyond all these stupid little petty hatreds we have. Anyway, my friends, well, that I'm going to say, please subscribe, bang the bell, click all. Thank you for watching. And I'm going to put another video right here for you to watch. I think the eye pencil video. Yeah, you need to watch that just to know how frail we truly are. So, again, thank y'all for watching. And with that, I'm going to say,